because I got to do this. I got to do this live. 3, 2, 1. What up? It's the Full 48, live from the Sloan Conference. Live because I actually have a live audience here. In addition to my guest Sam Amick from The Athletic. Sam, thank you.
What
thank
up,
you all
Beck?
for.
Can I steal that line, or is that just?
Yeah, you can.
All right.
I mean, Zach doesn't have it trademarked or anything.
He might hear me and come in and get mad at me. All right. What up, Beck?
He should. He should have trademarked. He could be charging people like, I don't know, a nickel each or something.
Absolutely.
So we're at the Sloan Conference here in Boston at the Heinz Convention Center. We do have some folks in the audience here. Thank you, folks, for showing up. And at some point, we'll just do kind of a Q&A thing. You can just shout out some questions. I've never done a podcast in front of an audience before, so this is all new and weird. But yeah, let's roll.
I've never done a podcast with you where I wasn't in sweatpants in my office on the phone. So this is very new.
I don't really need to know what you're wearing when we're doing a podcast.
Clean sweatpants. What's wrong with that?
That's fine. I mean, I don't need to know.
I didn't say drawers, for crying out loud. Keep it moving.
We have done this podcast before, but never in person, so this is fun. All right, well, let's at least hit. Let's give some lip service to the topic of analytics since we were at the Sloan Conference. You and I usually kind of just banter about the NBA and whatever's going on in the league at the time. We'll get all that. But I've been coming to this conference for a bunch of years. You've been here before, I think.
Many times.
We as sports writers, we try to learn at least a little bit to make ourselves like slightly more intelligent in our coverage. What do you think has changed the most in the way you or all of us on this side of it write about the NBA now versus 5-10 years ago?
Well, I mean, certainly as far as this event goes, the scope is, to see it go, I think my first year being 2010 to what it is now, I got the tail end of, this is a weird parallel, but in baseball, when I was a kid, I went to spring training a long time ago when you could go to spring training and there were like 30 people in the stands. And I remember Will Clark, I was a Giants fan, he'd be in the batting cage and you could sit there and watch a guy of that caliber do his thing because the crowd was so small. Sloan in 2009, 2010 was very small. Today, I told a buddy earlier that I felt like a fullback in the hallway trying to navigate the traffic, and the numbers are just, it's massive. I do think the ripple effect that we've seen on coverage is fascinating because you had this stretch of 2, 3, 4 years around that 2010 era where I think it was like an infusion of, yes, all of us trying to get smarter about the way we cover the league and the types of ways that we're quantifying everything. But it was maybe a little bit of overkill early on where we were trying too hard to kind of jam this into the coverage. What's been, I think, fun and fascinating since then is kind of the leveling out where, I think we all consistently tried to, in a sophisticated way, combine, the analytics and what they bring to the table with the human side, which, as you know, you and I traffic on that side a lot. But it's overall the impact has been extremely positive, I think, as far as just the whole conversation.
No, I think we cover the game smarter now than we used to. The entire discussion, and not just us, but fans, media, TV broadcasts. It's very rare now to see anybody still trying to assess a team's defense based on points per game allowed. Like that graphic, I think has finally died.
Right.
And that took a long time. It took I think even for those of us who were trying to be in tune with all of this and a smarter way of discussing the game early on, as analytics kind of came into our sphere, there was still a lot of this resistance among many of our peers in print media, certainly TV. But I think we're finally at a point where there's a better discussion. I actually have this. I'd be curious to know if anybody in the audience has a feeling on this. I feel like we need to kill field goal percentage. I'm at a point now where I'm actually I still don't think the audience, everybody, this audience different than the average audience, but the general audience still doesn't really grasp effective field goal percentage or true shooting percentage, though it's really not that hard. But field goal percentage in an era where there's a bazillion threes a game doesn't make sense anymore. Why are we even assessing anybody's?
Yeah, we're compartmentalizing. We have two tracks of, is this guy shooting well or not? Because when you're looking at field goal and three-point, I agree. I think it's – and then you've got guys like James Harden this year is a great example because if you just look at field goal percentage, the average fan is going to say, oh, this guy's missing the mark.
Yeah. I actually had a friend in the industry who I think is otherwise smart about basketball trying to tell me that Harden was inefficient.
Right.
And I'm trying to explain why that's not the case. And as soon as I brought up effective field goal percentage, I got a emoji eye roll thrown at me.
Well, and not to throw our colleagues under the bus, but honestly, we're closer to awards voting season right now. I wonder a few months from now, like James's MVP candidacy. We'll never know this, but how many voters are going to look at that number and have that be a deterrent as they break all this down?
At a very minimum, I just want to have, like, if we discuss somebody's shooting percentage, at a very minimum, can we just, like, talk about their 2-point percentage versus their 3-point percentage and just have those be separate things? Right? Like, I'll start the movement today. No more field goal percentage.
There it is.
If 2-point, 3-point, effective, whatever, but just not straight field goal percentage. You mentioned the MVP race. You just wrote about this at length, actually, on The Athletic, about kind of your feelings where we are, 6 weeks out or so?
Yeah, 6 weeks.
Ballots will arrive in about another month or so.
Right.
You've got some early impressions, or not that early anymore, but your impressions of the MVP race right now.
Right.
Is it just a 3-man race, or are we going to see Jokic or somebody else kind of crash the party?
I think it is, for me, it's a 3-man race. My colleague at The Athletic, Nick Kosmider, does a great job covering the Nuggets. The funny thing was I dropped my story looking at awards all over the league on the same day that he dropped his Jokic for MVP story. And now it was a smart piece, fantastic arguments, and I'm kind of laughing at the irony because Jokic wasn't on my list. I had Paul, and I had Giannis, and I had James. I still think that Jokic is, I was going to say acquired taste. He's not acquired at all, but he just takes a second and third look to appreciate him. And I think in other years going forward, could he be the MVP? 100%. Right now in this year, where when you go from James to Giannis to Paul, and this is certainly not the most complicated metric, but some of the history these guys are making when it comes to just simply what they are doing is on the kind of level that I just don't think it's a great year for Jokic and that whole argument to kind of find its way in.
Yeah. And the unfortunate thing for him, I think there's two things that are kind of counting against him. One is that maybe people still aren't appreciating how good the Denver Nuggets are.
Sure.
And, in most years, the MVP is coming from, a top 2 or 3 team in the conference, and the Nuggets have been consistently in that range the whole time.
Yep.
And maybe people still aren't used to that. And he just doesn't look the part.
Right.
Like
Not at all.
There's a whole thing here where we just throw out all analytics, all data, everything logical, and just say, I think people have a hard time with Jokic because he doesn't look the part.
A long time ago, this is a random story, but I wrote a thing about a Sacramento radio man. I think you know him, Carmichael Dave.
Yes.
And for years since then, it was in the context of a Ron Artest profile that I wrote. And Ron used to go on the radio with Dave and do radio things. And I described Dave as having a cushy poker player's build. And that is what Jokic has. I mean, he doesn't look like a pro athlete. And then even his personality, I read today Zach Lowe's, 10 things I like and don't like. He had a Jokic note with video of the Joker needed to stop doing these cranky fouls. And he had these, like he misses a shot, thought he was fouled, literally just smacking the hell out of somebody to get that 4th foul, that 5th foul. He doesn't look the part. He's not a Defensive Player of the Year candidate by any means, and you have 2 guys in the running right now who are incredible defenders. So again, fantastic year. I don't think he's in that conversation.
Yeah, it's hard. And then, of course, there's the fact that we all have a completely different definition for what MVP is anyway, which I think is fine. I mean, all due respect to Rachel Nichols, who's a good friend of both of ours and who is still driving for the let's separate MVP from the most outstanding. It's an interesting thought to say that these could be 2 different things.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly fine with the fact that we have absolute ambiguity and no uniformity of thought with how we define MVP. It's fine because there's 100 voters, and then just the greater fandom out there who will all define it their own way. It's a debate. It's a discussion. It's fine. And
I'm on your side on that debate. I don't want listen, we already know these guys will never admit it. There are superstars who are hunting numbers. You know what I mean? And that can be parallel to winning. It doesn't mean it's taking away. I don't want an award I think if you just had most outstanding player, the risk would be you're incentivizing just hunting numbers, because that would be what that award is versus, trying to help the team win.
Also, Rachel's point has been it doesn't make sense that we'll come out of this era where LeBron won his 4 MVPs, but we knew that every single year of his career for, I don't know, however many years it will end up being, like a 15-year span where he was definitely the best player in the game, and the MVP doesn't reflect that. But I'm comfortable with that. History will record very well that LeBron was the best player of the era, with the MVP awards or without. I don't think we need that. He doesn't need that extra validation. So I'm not concerned with that part of it. And then the aspect of it where people are constantly trying to whittle this down into something that is more fundamentally defensible, or data driven. Well, okay, well then we can just come up with a stat. We can just whatever stat you want to do, find any all-in-one stat, and we'll just run the numbers, and whoever has the best number, okay, they're MVP. Well, then there's no discussion to have.
Right.
And it won't take into account anything about narrative that people don't like. Narrative became a pejorative at some point.
Right.
Like, no, the narrative of the season matters.
Right.
It matters that you led your team in a certain way, or that you performed in the clutch at certain key parts of the season,
right.
or your comportment, how you uplifted your teammates, whether you checked out for a full month,
right.
as guys have sometimes done. So it can never be just the numbers.
To drill down on that, because you mentioned Jokic earlier, where are you at with James and Giannis? And before you answer, so I wrote the thing the other day. I had Giannis out front, and what he's doing is incredible. I saw the Bucks the other night in Sacramento, and what struck me was, listen, all season long his numbers across the board are incredible. But that particular night, and granted he was coming off the knee situation, so he's trying to find his way. But the Bucks had 73 points at halftime, and Giannis had 5. And I'm sitting there going, I just put him ahead of James, and I guarantee you that's the kind of stuff that's got to piss James off. Like, oh, that must be nice. Your team's got 73 at halftime, and you got 5. A couple minutes ago, I ran into Monty McNair, part of the Rockets front office, and I told him that story. And because, as you know, this time of year, just to pull you guys are in it, pull the media curtain back a little bit, the politicking is a little out of control this time of year, when every time you run into somebody from a team, they're trying to gauge you, like, where you out on this award, where you out here, and they're essentially lobbyists trying to, figure out what direction you're going. But James, Paul is in it too, but the James and Giannis thing to me is pretty fascinating.
It is, and I feel like if we just make it about that, it's actually going to be unfair to Paul George. Like I think, I don't know if they're all three co-equals in this discussion right now, and which is why I always kind of reserve judgment and try not to get yanked into it before we get to the end, because what matters over the next 6 weeks could matter a lot. Yeah. Somebody might fall off a cliff. Somebody, might, finish down the stretch that their team might go 22-3 and jump 4 places in the standings. And again, all that matters. Like,
right.
I'm one who also thinks 1 through 82 all matter, right? So it kind of matters that the Rockets were a disaster early on. Mm-hmm. It won't be a huge factor in how I ultimately vote, but being great 1 through 82 and consistent, both on the individual and team level, matters, because as I've always said, the team part of it, the team success part of it matters in this ultimate debate, because for most of the history of the award, it has mattered, Russell Westbrook notwithstanding.
You must have read my column the other day where I wrote a note to our colleagues saying, please don't submit your votes early, because that's something else I don't think fans know, is that I looked at it last year. The league sent out the ballot on April 2nd. It was due on April 13th, but I think we're all kind of, especially kind of the people who like to get the to-do list done as quickly as possible, just file that baby and turn it in. There's 4 games left,
Yeah, I don't know how many. I've never asked the NBA. I don't know if they would tell us, but I suspect that some people probably turn them in immediately for whatever reason, or they've already had their minds made up, whatever. I'm stubborn the other direction. I think I am literally one of the last 2 people sending that thing to Mark Broussard at the NBA PR office. I get the email at some point going, you're sending this thing,
too.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And shoot, now the awards are June, so there's no rush. They shouldn't even send that thing out until,
Yeah, but then we'd have the postseason affecting our.
That's fine.
Their regular season awards, not postseason awards.
Right.
I hate the fact that we have to wait till the end of June to get the results anyway.
Right.
Yeah, I'm still not used to, and will never probably get used to the NBA having changed that part. Right. On us. The lobbying thing is funny though, actually, because I'll tell this story because I don't think he'll mind, because it's from a long time ago anyway. So Tim Frank, who of course great PR person for the NBA, but was once upon a time the Rockets PR person, and famously Steve Francis versus Elton Brand for Rookie of the Year back in '99, whatever it was, and it was neck and neck. It was a really tight race, and back then it was a one-name ballot.
Okay.
It was not ranked. There were no points, whatever. It was one name. That's how you could have ties. That's how Kidd and Grant Hill tied back in the day. It's now, I think, mathematically impossible. But I was on the fence. I was in LA back then. I had a ballot. I was on the fence, and I was trying to figure out where I'm going with all this. Elton Brand put up big numbers. Steve Francis has been fantastic, all this. Tim Frank, Rockets PR person, calls and gave a 15-minute spiel about why Steve Francis should get it over Elton Brand.
Right.
point guard, it's the toughest position in the league to play, and this and that. I can't even remember everything, but he had like it was a damn good presentation.
Right.
So this wasn't like the backroom lobbying and hallways, whatever, like here, whatever. This was like, I'm calling you for a very specific reason.
Right. I got one yesterday, and again, I think it's harmless to share. On that column, 6-man, I think I had 4 guys, and it was Sabonis out front, but Lou Williams and Montrezl Harrell, and I get a text from Dennis Rogers, Clippers PR, who was like, I got to send you some analytics. What are you doing? And I said, he was focused on Lou, which I thought was interesting. And I said, he's on the list. And he goes, there shouldn't be a list. It's like, okay, relax, you know. And this stuff happens. I saw Daryl Morey earlier. I wish he was in the room. This a couple years ago, I either wrote that I was going to vote for Russ for MVP, or maybe I had already voted for Russ for MVP. And then I went to Houston for a game. And this is just the human part. And I go out on the court pregame, and Daryl and Gerson Rosas are in the corner. And it was like, I could tell the closer I got, 30 feet away, 20 feet away, his face is just looking at me. And then I'm getting, he had fun with it, but I'm getting heckled. Yeah. He's like, you can't talk to us, get out of here, you know. And they joke, but listen, they're human, so they want their guys to get rewarded, and we've got financial incentives tied to this stuff. But it's that time of year. I
feel like team personnel, front office personnel, take this more personally than they used to. It used to be like, I think the players always took it personally. It's their reward. Yeah. And PR staffs, depending on the team, might send out like goofy stuff to promote their guys. All right, that's all fine. I feel like front office personnel are more into this now than they used to be. I think they're like, I think it's. But
I think that's by proxy because the players care, and the players aren't necessarily, unless you really have a good relationship with the guy. Yeah. He's never going to tell you what he's thinking. He's just going to complain to the team. But how did I lose this? How did I lose that? Yeah. You know, tangentially, I remember at a Pro Basketball Writers Association meeting where we were debating what we do. Mark Spears of ESPN, at one point we were debating the fact that votes are obviously publicized. And you were in the room when we did that. And Mark had brought up the concern that with players, sometimes you're trying to convince them to cooperate for an interview or whatever it might be, and then that guy saw, in the public specter that you didn't vote for him. And next thing you know, like, does that have a ripple effect on that dynamic?
And that was a discussion that we all had as the writers, 5, 6 years ago, 7 years, however long it's been since we voted to say, let's go with transparency. And we agreed with the league to do this and say, make our votes public. And, I believe that, look, we're journalists. Like, we shouldn't be hiding behind anything. I don't think, journalists should ever no comment. I don't like seeing when media companies we work for no comments. Like, if what we're about is trying to get people on the record with the facts and everything else and accountability and all these things that go in with the job, then we should be accountable too. So I've been happy with it, and not all of our colleagues agree, and some are still uncomfortable with it. I don't find that there's been really much backlash. Like, I haven't found that personally. I have yet to feel like people knowing who I voted for is hurting me in any way or causing any. Have you had any tensions along those lines?
No, none come to mind. I mean, the Russ James thing, I feel like it was hotter that year, and Russ in particular, he's such a divisive guy, the way he plays, that there were more kind of voices that season than normal. But I've never had somebody ice me out because of what I voted.
All right, this is an analytics-driven crowd. How many raise of hands? How many people think Russ deserved the MVP over Harden that year? 1, 2, 3, 4. How many Harden? That majority of the room. That's what I would expect. All right, everyone's playing to type. That's good.
Can I admit, like, this is therapeutic publicly here, that I'm torn on the fact that now Russ doing it 3 years in a row on the triple-double side it forces me out. Kind of want to hit the time machine rewind button and go back and decide if that would affect the way I looked at it back then. Yeah. It's just incredible that we've gone from that, where, I'm not kidding, I was talking to Oscar Robertson like once every 3 weeks that season for context. And
he's probably never been called more by NBA writers than
I thought about looking that up the other day. I was going to write it, like, go through the call log and find out when's the last time I called. I have not called him this year because, like everybody else, he's got another triple-double average. Like, you're shrugging because it's become the norm. Yeah. But that year, that was obviously huge.
I don't know if we know what to make of it anymore because we've become so numb to it. All right, let's change gears entirely. There's going to be a panel tomorrow morning. This podcast is going to air, or at least air. It's going to publish on Monday, so this will be after the fact. But there's one of the panels I'm looking forward to the most is tomorrow morning. Jeannie Buss, Lakers owner, Wyc Grousbeck, Celtics owner, reviving the rivalry. This is going to be a lot of fun, and those are two good personalities too, so I think they're going to have fun with it. So let me throw this uncomfortable question at you as we're sitting here in Boston. Who's got a bigger crisis on their hands right now?
I'm West Coast based. Maybe I'm West Coast biased. I think the Lakers do. The Celtics still have, these are good problems to have. Not right now. We'll see how tonight's game goes against the Wizards, Sunday against the Rockets. But you've got a cupboard full of, picks, incredible players, multiple tracks in terms of building and planning, and all those tracks still look pretty good. Even if Kyrie leaves, there's no tears for what's going on in Boston. The Lakers thing, I think, is potentially, getting closer to crisis mode when it comes to what's next. We are already seeing, for one, I think underreported, under-talked about, LeBron's injury earlier this year got my attention just because it was Mr. Superhuman not being superhuman anymore, reminding you that just from the sheer age side of things, 16 seasons, Father Time's undefeated, like we always say, and so that clock is ticking, and if they don't get AD this summer, which I don't think they will, and then it's not complicated. Go down the list of free agents, and in terms of the intel that's currently out there, I don't see who's coming their way, and so with that, they don't have multiple tracks. They have a bunch of young guys who are now disenfranchised with their experience because they were supposed to be part of the whole thing. And now the Kuzmas and, Ingram seems to be in an okay place, but, the handling of that was so messy. And I honestly, and I've said this on other shows, LeBron going public with his I want to play with AD thing, I think it just opened up Pandora's box, because his teammates are smart enough to know, that's great, but you got to give up the whole kit and caboodle for that. And so now you want me, if you're Luke Walton, and now you want to preach we over me, hey guys, buy in, let's do this playoff push. How do you reconcile all of that if you're, LeBron's teammate? So long answer, but I think it's the Lakers.
Yeah, I tend to agree. For this season, it feels like the Celtics almost have more at stake, because if things don't go the right way, maybe they lose Kyrie, right? There's already, plenty of smoke around the possibility of him leaving. But you're right, they're well positioned, right? Okay, fine. They re-signed Terry Rozier. They still can trade a package of guys for AD, but does AD want to be there if Kyrie's not there? That's always been looked at as kind of the linchpin to him re-signing is to play with Kyrie. So there's
the tricky,
that.
That part also I think is under talked about, because I heard our buddy Chris Mannix, now back at SI, say the other day that his impression was that that Kyrie re-signing was contingent on them getting AD, and it's all right, well, AD wanted to be there.
There's a small chicken and egg problem here.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So I don't know how they get that resolved. That's very real. I think that and that with New York obviously sitting there looming and hoping that thing falls apart. But I don't know the sequence of events there.
I always thought the way it was going to go was that, they're going to re-sign Kyrie, and Kyrie's going to be there as the recruiter, obviously on July 1st, and never a minute before that, because that would be improper. Yeah. That Kyrie would be the one saying, hey, AD, I'm here, and I'm here for the duration. They're going to make the deal, assure them you're going to resign or whatever. I thought it would go more along those lines. Somebody else had actually laid out this possibility, which I think actually makes a lot of sense to reverse the chicken egg thing, is that you make the trade for AD around the draft, and whatever that's going to take, and then the Celtics are going to have to measure that out, right? How much are we willing to go in on him without really knowing if he's going to resign, without really knowing for certain about Kyrie, although maybe they already do. But you do that first, and then by the time July 1st gets there, Kyrie knows you've got AD, and that's the incentive for him to stay. So it reverses what I would have thought the conventional wisdom would be about that.
But you can't gloss over the fact that you don't know what package you're willing to give, without knowing if he wants to resign.
Right. That's a tough calibration.
Yeah. The other component to me, and I heard this from another team the other day, is just that idea that, when's the lottery? What's our date?
May
25th or something like that?
Something, yeah.
There are people around the league who feel like, whoever's getting that number one pick is getting AD. And so I think that night, the stakes are always pretty high. On that night, I think they might be higher than normal.
And this is the other twist possibly for the Lakers, too. Okay, maybe the Pelicans don't want your players. Or maybe Brandon Ingram's play now has gotten the Pelicans to reconsider.
Sure.
Maybe the new GM of the Pelicans will assess their talent differently than the, since departed Dell Demps. I mean, all that could change. Or the Lakers could flip some of those pieces for other pieces that the Pelicans actually want.
Right.
Which, is something that I don't think has been discussed quite as much.
Windhorst wrote that a little while ago.
Yeah.
Brian wrote that. I mean, it's true. That's when I think this is a bigger discussion, and the perfect kind of place to have this talk is just the competency of front offices, because that type of a task requires turning over every stone and finding, and Eric Pincus is in the crowd, you know what I'm talking about, like you got to find the deals, and time is of the essence. So, Magic, Rob Pelinka, they got to find those opportunities and get the whatever pieces they need to get the guy.
Yeah, I've been curious to see this, and like Eric would know, being in LA and being around them a lot, even as often as you make those trips up and down California. It's been a lot of pressure on Luke Walton, a lot of heat on him for various reasons. It seems to me like so far there's not been as much on Magic and Rob. Is that starting to come around? Are they starting to feel it, because like they put together this roster, they're accountable for almost everybody on it. It's coming.
Our beat writer at The Athletic, shameless plug, Bill Oram does a great. Bill's been hammering Magic on a pretty consistent basis.
Yeah, Bill's getting him good.
And the tricky thing is, with Rob's the day-to-day guy, and I don't know, like Magic's presence, his impact when it comes to connecting with guys around the league. I want to keep learning more about how they function, because I don't know that Magic is turning over every stone in the way that he probably should be.
Yeah, well, I mean, he came into it actually saying, I need to go to the Olympic Tower in Manhattan and go learn about the salary cap, because I don't know it.
Right.
And Rob Pelinka obviously does know all that stuff as a former agent, but we've discussed this before, and I said this to Jeannie when she was on the pod last year. Like, you hired two guys who've never done the job before. That doesn't mean I'm saying they can't. Just that there's a little bit of
which
a risk
is pretty
involved.
normal. Like my neck of the woods near Sacramento. I mean, Vlade Divac has been through that the first couple of years,
and they paid a price for it for several years.
Yeah. And they, you see the players bring. And not that you can generalize across the board, but a skill set and a perspective that I do still think is lacking in a lot of front offices. But then certainly, like the other side of it, knowing how the sausage gets made is a massive part of the gig.
Yeah, and the funny thing there too is if the idea of having Magic in the front office or having a player influence is we'll understand better about not just talent but how talent fits together and everything, and yet the Lakers had one of the most bizarre off seasons in terms of their signings out after LeBron.
Right.
That there could be. So it kind of flies in the face of that. Couple more, and then we'll see if folks have questions. But you have a story you told me you're working on about the Milwaukee Bucks. What is, aside from the fact that they went from being a very average-ish team to being contenders almost overnight by adding, as I say, like just a coach. Like they didn't sign an all-star. They didn't sign, like, all due respect to Brook Lopez and everybody. They brought in Mike Budenholzer, and all of a sudden they are dominant.
Right.
What are you learning about the Bucks in the time you've spent with them recently?
So one of my favorite parts of where I live near Sacramento is that it's such a small market that you can catch teams as they come through. And with all due respect to folks in Milwaukee, it's not a place that it's far away, it's cold, and I don't typically get out there. I'm going to get out there during the playoffs for sure. But Milwaukee came through my part of the country, and I caught up with their people for a couple of days, and I love their group. And what I'm going to try to write about and get into is the idea that to take a step back league-wide, I've spent a ton of time around the Warriors. A lot of respect for Steve Kerr, Bob Myers, what they've built, and they constantly talk about this culture of joy and this environment that they've tried to create. That Warriors team this year, with all the Kevin Durant stuff, with the integration of Demarcus Cousins, and I'm around them enough to, like, that joy is not the same. It's a different vibe. Then the Bucks come through, and again, I'm just trying to learn about them. And it was only a couple days, but I was really struck by what they have going that, to me, does bear some similarity to the way the Warriors felt early on. Giannis in particular, the way he's wired, this is ironic for a media guy to say that he loves that a superstar doesn't do a lot of media, but I did connect with him a little bit to talk about, like, why he doesn't, because he won't do a lot of one-on-one interviews on the side. He'll do his daily regimented required media, but some of the biggest names in the media game will ask for time far bigger than myself, and he'll say no. And I did get a chance to ask him, like, listen, man, you got the MVP on the line. You have a lot at stake. In my experience, young guys like you with these types of individual opportunities would try to go down that road while continuing to win games. And he went on this kind of tirade about it. He's like, no offense, but like, you're not going to win me MVP. You're not going to win me a championship. If I get on the cover of GQ, if I get on the cover of Slam Magazine, that's not going to win me anything. So he is the epicenter of what they have going, I think, culturally. Yeah. And they like each other, man. Like Chris Middleton talked a lot about the locker room. It's cliche, but they go to dinners all the time on the road, not just practice nights, but game nights. I asked him, like, does everybody like each other, which is a corny question. And he's like, no, man, we're all assholes. Like, he's like, listen, if we have an asshole, then we snuff it out. And they have a leadership thing going with Giannis, with Chris. Bledsoe, Malcolm seems to be.
Is this a leadership council like the Bulls have?
It feels like.
Were they elected? Did they hold meetings?
No, not official. Not official.
Not quite.
But it was kind of like he listed 4 names, and I think the list is only 4. You know what I mean? Like, that was interesting. Malcolm Brogdon's been there long enough now, even though he's on the younger side, that he's got a voice. Bledsoe, I think, again, media-wise, nationally, we still overlook Bledsoe. He was the Clippers chapter, the Suns, yada, yada. Like the other night, I don't know if you saw this possession, he shut down De'Aaron Fox late in that Sacramento game with one of the best defensive possessions I've seen in years. Now, granted, the Kings should have run something to kind of free De'Aaron up, but, Bledsoe is a part of that leadership group. I'm a sucker for this is the Sloan is where we break down every single X's and O's that comes with the game, but these people have to function together, and liking each other matters a lot. And I don't know what's going to happen in the playoffs, but they really seem like they've got a great environment going.
Yeah, no, it's funny because as soon as anybody brings up stuff like that, then everybody will always cite some team from the past where, like, guys hated each other, fought, whatever, won anyway. Like, oh, yeah, okay, it happens. I think you're much more likely to win if you've got the talent and the bonds with each other, that relationship where you actually do care about each other, right? Because that's where the sacrifice and all the other stuff that we can turn into cliches comes in. Like, those things matter. They're important.
They do.
I think.
We just hit on the Lakers, and yeah. I talked to Luke about this, a couple months ago, in his situation. Is again, as a coach, when you don't have individual incentives for all these players and their career paths and their life stories to buy in and to think about somebody else before themselves, then the thing is broken, and it's tough to do. Okay, fine. Kobe, Shaq, Lakers, when talent is to the point where it kind of supersedes all that, is a different story.
Yeah. Also, they put aside their bullshit for 5 minutes here and there long enough to win games.
Which the Warriors are probably doing. You know what I mean? Like, they're having issues this year.
Oh, they clearly are doing that, right? Yeah. Like, I mean, if they didn't shut down what was going on between them early on, like, this season would already be off the rails.
Yeah. I've talked to Kevin about this, and his point I wrote the other day about that I thought he should pay attention to his coverage less, and had a conversation with him where he said, well, you even wrote, like, it's not affecting my play. You know what I mean? Like, he's just,
You shouldn't be reading that, Kevin.
I know.
Like, it's great that you're reading it, but
right.
Stop. Like, can you, like, have the people
but
let it cancel?
He's a hell of a compartmentalizer. I mean, that dude is out there balling. It's not affecting him.
No question, except when it does.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, yeah, look, if it's not affecting him on the court and it's just him being pissy now and then off the court, like, right. At least that's the proper balance, right?
Sure.
So, all right, real quick, Kings, team in your backyard. This is like a breakthrough season. Like, they're one of the, like, Bagley aside, we don't have an MRI result, do we yet?
Yeah, 1 to 2 weeks.
Okay. Oh, right.
Better than expected because he looked to be in a lot of pain. I thought it was going to be like a season ender.
So immersed in conversations here and everything, I feel like I've barely checked my magic box here. So the Bagley thing, fortunately, not serious. They've been one of the feel-good stories of this season. I feel like them in the West, the Nets in the East.
Yep.
If there's one thing you could point to, after all these years of the Kings being kind of a joke, what turned it around? Why are they finally on the right path?
Can I point to 2?
Yes.
I mean, actually, they're pretty tied in. De'Aaron Fox and his jump and his development. It's fun to see guys. It's not just, this is not year 1 to year 2 development, in my opinion, because we all know, like, that happens, and then you talk most improved, which we talked awards. I've got, De'Aaron and Siakam. Certainly Pascal, I think, is going to win it. But De'Aaron's been great. But his shooting and the fact that this guy got in the lab all summer long and tried to fix his shot is massive. What he's been able to do from beyond the arc, he's now a threat where, they got to come out. But his speed is just ridiculous. And Dave Yeager unlocking that with the way they're playing, they caught the whole league off guard early on. I'm impressed and surprised that they have been able to keep it up because we felt like this was going to be like in baseball when that pitcher has to go around the lineup a second time and has a tougher time. They've kept it going. And it fits in well with today's NBA. The shooting they have, Buddy Hield having a fantastic year. They found something here, and the young core is really good. And you mentioned Marvin. I mean, Luke has been awesome. Trae Young's been incredible, certainly of late. But Bagley's had a really strong last couple of months, and I think long term he's going to be a nice fit for them.
Yeah, and also it's funny because it puts a different reflection now on, like, I took a very unpopular stance at the time of the Demarcus Cousins trade. I thought they made the right deal. I thought they got as much as they could for him given the depressed market around him.
Yeah.
And it wasn't great. I'm not saying it was great, but it was
looks
the right.
pretty good now.
It looks great now.
Yeah.
Like, I think, even the Achilles injury aside, I think you'd still say that given where the Kings are, forget where the Pelicans are, the Kings made a great deal. That enabled them to get not only Hield directly, but put them in a position to get Fox.
Right.
And a lot of other ancillary pieces, and just gave them, I think, maybe just the fresh start they needed.
No, I agree. And, I mean, listen, the thing I like and I've enjoyed about dealing with Vlade even more recently is that I like anybody who can own their mistakes. It'd be one thing if he was running around acting like, no, I had this the whole time and you guys were killing me for no reason. He doesn't. Like, again, not to get too Sacramento-centric, but one thing that gets forgotten in his early time there is that they brought him in as an advisor, and that was supposed to be like the guy next to the owner. And then Pete D'Alessandro left because they didn't read the room, and I'm talking other Kings management, not Vlade. They didn't read the room and realize that if you bring a person like Vlade into that organization, Pete, with good reason, is going to look around and say, what is happening here? And so that didn't really work, and so Pete leaves. And now you have no support system around a guy in Vlade who's never done this job before. They subsequently hired Ken Cantanella and eventually Brandon Williams. And those guys, even though those dynamics, I've reported a lot about the personal stuff this year, but those are talented executives who have helped Vlade, snuff out these deals and figure out how to make these moves. I like the fact that Vlade he's owning all of that and growing into the job.
Yeah. And they've done a much better job the last couple of years with, I think, what a more complete front office than what they had when he initially kind of was shuffled into the.
And Peja, I shouldn't leave out. Peja Stojakovic.
Do not leave out Peja.
Yeah.
Should we take some questions?
Sure.
We got time here. Anybody? Yeah, just shout it out.
I believe it was Draymond who said that the Kings and Warriors would have like a rivalry, but this was the start. Which team, like with all their pending free agencies for the Warriors and the rising of the Kings, 5 years from now, who do you see is the better?
Between Kings and Warriors? That's a good question. I mean, there is a scenario that if it plays out, I would give it to the Kings for sure. I mean, Steph, how old is Steph now?
30?
Yeah, I mean, 35-year-old Steph, 33-year-old Clay, 34, whatever Clay is. If Kevin leaves, Draymond leaves. The Warriors' problem that is not going to get exposed, I mean, maybe it could in these playoffs, but probably not until down the line, is just a lot of their younger guys have not panned out at all. They don't have depth. They've had some tough picks. They had guys this year that they brought in that were supposed to be rotation players. Jacob Evans was supposed to be that guy. That didn't happen. McKinney's had a great start early on and then kind of trailed off. Jordan Bell has not become a consistent part of the solution. So we talk about the Celtics having a full cupboard, teams like that. I mean, the Warriors don't have a full cupboard going forward.
But that's a common problem, right? Like, there's very rarely a team that is a contender year in, year out, much less a champion 3 times in 4 years or whatever. 3 and 4 so far. That does a good job of adding talent, because obviously you're drafting low by consequence. That's
right.
How the system is set up. So unless you're going to be acing the 30th pick or the 29th pick, or finding that one hidden gem out of the G League or something, I mean, it's really, really hard. Almost every team that's great for any sustained period of time ultimately hits a spot like this. And plus, like Livingston and Iguodala are
getting older,
are getting up there. Anybody else?
Given that a lot of the coverage in your writing is so much more analytics focused over 5 years ago, and the conversation with general management is that way, it seems like the players are still not as interested in talking about that. You're Paul Pierce, limited analytics interest. How does that change your research, your reporting? Everybody but the players are so much more analytics driven.
All right, so for the sake of the podcast, I'm going to repeat the question a little bit so when people are listening later, they understand. So the question was about how players still not necessarily being as analytics fluent, I guess, how that's affecting us in terms of the way we're covering them or those discussions. Your perspective on it.
It's fun. I don't know if I would call it fluent. I'm just not analytics willing for the most part. It's funny, the question to throw at you, like, do we have a Shane Battier in today's game? Like, there's not
That's a good question.
a guy who just – J.J. Redick does a lot of that.
Sure.
J.J. comes to mind. Actually, that'd be a good story. I would like to have more clarity across the league on which players, are focused on analytics. I'll have times in talking to guys where even relatively basic things where it's like, hey, are you tracking net rating at all? The part that I'll never be able to relate to is that I can certainly kind of try to empathize with is like, I just think in general, doing this on the court, being, guys don't want all of that in their head. And that's where it's a challenge for everybody here to get certain intel, get certain information across to them in the kind of way that makes it applicable. Because you'll have, even like an advanced scout, he'll turn in 30-plus pages, on what he is seeing out there. And then the coaching staff's job, that is not easy, is like, let's get 35 pages down to literally half a sheet, if that, of talking points that only manifest themselves in like 5 or 6 comments during shoot-around. It's a trip to see how the whole thing just gets whittled down. But I do wonder if, like, hypothetical 10 years from now, does this finally penetrate into the player side more?
I think so. My theory is, and I kind of alluded to this on the panel earlier, like, I think that players growing up now, like if you're a 13, 15-year-old kid now coming up and you're a big NBA fan and you're reading, whether it's our coverage or reading somebody who's very stat focused, or just because the coverage even on TV has changed a little bit, and as I mentioned earlier, I think the smarter stats are being used more often. If you come up in that environment, I think it's only natural that you'll be more open to it, or at least familiar with it. So maybe 5 years from now, the generation of players that's coming in, are more fluent, savvy, open to it. I would even think even just the younger players in today's NBA over 5 years ago, probably if it's already become a staple of their diet to say, hey, listen, here's your heat chart. Here's where you're best from the floor.
Right.
We've got it to show you in vivid, graphic form here. I mean, I got to think that has a little bit of an impact.
Right.
And these guys live on social media too, so maybe they're following Kirk Goldsberry and seeing his graphics up there. I mean, it's in the ether.
Right.
It's all around you now. So even if they're not seeking it out, they're absorbing it.
ABC recently, I was just watching a game, and I felt like it was a new thing to have graphics on, not even just the ESPN, but the actual, national network, with ABC having net rating up there, which, I feel like mainstream TV is typically the slowest to kind of evolve, and it's penetrating that side of it. So
yeah, NBA TV, same. NBA TV, it took a while, but
right.
The net rating and offensive rating, defensive rating are usually the way they're displaying that now. It's
right.
they're not using the old stats, and like that's a very small thing. That's the very surface level part of advanced stats, but it's a really important shift in
right.
mindset and the way that people understand the game.
Right.
More? Other questions? Yes.
Just back to the Lakers. If they don't get AD, what's the best they can do this summer? Like Kemba, Jimmy, what can they do?
I mean, if they want to give Jimmy their money, Jimmy will take it. I'm wondering what Jimmy's going to do. My feeling right now, that Philly situation is interesting.
Yeah.
Last night I enjoyed. I went to a Sixers event. Josh Harris was there. Some of the other Sixers people, and Howard was there. And I told somebody earlier, like, to be in the room with a team is something that we don't typically get to be a part of, where the game's on the TV and, Sixers extend the lead and the room goes crazy and you kind of forgot that you were with these people. But I was watching that, thinking about Jimmy, and just my kind of vibe, gut, right? Like, I would be surprised if he's back. Maybe I'll be wrong. We'll see. So Jimmy's an interesting one for teams like the Lakers, because obviously he's going to want the max. But I just don't know if that's what LeBron had in mind when he went. That wasn't what we were talking about.
I don't think it's what Jimmy has in mind either. Like, Jimmy
right.
doesn't necessarily want to be in LeBron's
I just think
shadow.
the market might, I think it might be tough. I mean, he's going to look at New York, I believe. But the market will be interesting. I mean, to your question, so they don't get AD, there's a little bit of noise about, all right, is Clay definitely going to stay with the Warriors? I'm still going to be on that side. Like, Clay's not going anywhere. So, I don't know who that guy's going to be. And it's easy to say, if you're the Lakers, like, let's just be patient and be pragmatic and wait a year. But again, it goes back to the LeBron, that you can't wait a year with LeBron. You got to go right now, because 18 months from now, we don't know what kind of player he's going to be.
Yeah, I feel the same way as you do about Jimmy. The buzz around the league more and more for the last several weeks has been that I think people expect Jimmy to leave more than not. And whether that's by his own hand or by theirs is actually the real question here.
I think it's both.
It may be both.
You know those little gray area anecdotes that we always hesitate to share? I'll water this one down a little bit. But I talked to Jimmy recently, and it was just a casual conversation. But, like, I had posited the question about how's the adjustment going? You're used to being option number one, and kind of just put that on the table and was curious. And he kind of grinned, and I was like, what option are you now? He goes, oh, I'm an option. Like I think he's navigating all that stuff. And that's going to test for him and the rest of them. It's going to test that, A, are you buying this program and what they're selling? Because if you are, you got to sacrifice. Because they could be really good if they all decided to sacrifice in the way that the Sixers would love them to. But Tobias is a young guy who's trying to do his thing individually. Ben and Joel are interesting personality. Like, there's a lot of alpha male in that room.
Yeah, no question.
We'll see what happens.
And I felt all along that Tobias Harris, in addition to being a short-term gain, was also a play for, if things don't work out with Jimmy,
right,
we just can re-sign Tobias, and you've still got your big three. All right, maybe one, two more?
Yeah, I just want to stick to the subject of the Sixers. Curious your thoughts on Ben Simmons. I'm a Tyler Sixers fan, and I feel like he's a bit overrated. His hindrance to be able to shoot beyond 20 feet. I believe Zach Lowe was an article today about his inability to shoot the three. Just curious your thoughts on his progression.
So questions about Ben Simmons and whether he may be overrated or at least not the most Ben Simmons that Ben Simmons could be or something.
Nikola Mirotic agrees with you. That's I thought that was pretty great the other night. I don't know. This sounds like a stock answer, but I will. What year are we at with Ben now?
Three of actually playing.
Yeah. So it never ceases to amaze me the evolution that happens with these guys. Sometimes from 3 to 5. So overrated in the sense of level of hype and buzz and headlines that he has created in the context of what he's accomplished. That's probably fair. But you look at like a D'Angelo Russell this year, and I wouldn't want to send Ben packing and then watch him do what he's capable of doing somewhere else. I think I'd be pretty stubborn about letting him become who he could be.
And I'm always in the camp of we can't judge these guys and their skill sets and everything 2-3 years in necessarily. Guys figure it out at different stages. Guys develop jump shots at different stages. It's not out of the question that at some point he's going to get that down and become just absolutely unguardable. So I wouldn't write him up. All right, one more.
There's a lot of talk about the Knicks signing, two max free agents. My thinking is the Nets, right down the road, have a much better season at two max spots. Are you hearing anything about any players reporting to be more appropriate rather than the Knicks?
So the question is about the Knicks having two max slots.
That's your bailiwick, buddy. Your backyard.
My backyard. The Nets also having two max slots, and yeah, to your point, right? Like, it's funny. Nobody's talking about the Nets having two max slots. Like, even in New York, I feel like that's been almost forgotten. And they're having a far better season. Obviously, they have a better roster at the moment. Some of those guys have to be renounced to make room. But yeah, no, I think objectively speaking, the Nets are in much better place to sign one or two max guys than the Knicks are. They've got a much better sale to make. They've got a coach who's, I think, among the top candidates for Coach of the Year in Kenny Atkinson. The front office has done an incredible job under some of the toughest circumstances we've seen in the modern NBA, coming into a team with no talent and no picks of its own. They've aced picks. They've developed guys. I think they're in great shape. I think the Nets, if I were ordering the teams with max cap room this summer, I would put the Nets and the Clippers both ahead of the Knicks. And it doesn't really matter because I'm not the one who's going to ultimately sign. Like, I would say logically those teams are in better shape, but for all kinds of obvious reasons. But people, players, and sometimes their agents love the Knicks and whatever the aura of the Knicks is, and the Garden. And it has a different kind of cachet. The Nets don't have that cachet that's indisputable. And that's what they're up against. But I also think that the Nets, because it's the Spurs culture, Sean Marks coming from the Spurs culture, they're not playing up the idea of Kenny Atkinson for Coach of the Year. They're not playing up D'Angelo Russell for Most Improved or whatever else you may want to put him up for. They're not going to promote Sean Marks for Executive of the Year, and they're not promoting the idea. Like, I did an entire story about Steve Ballmer and the Clippers early in the season about how they were putting themselves in position to make the biggest mark in Clipper history in free agency. That's not a story that I would have been able to get the Nets to do. Certainly not at that level. They play it close to the vest. They're not self-promoting, and so we're not going to hear much about that. I think we're about. You want to?
I was going to say, I love this funny coast-to-coast dynamic we have this year with Knicks, Lakers, Nets, Clippers, and I'm waiting. It'll be fun this summer if one of these guys kind of counterintuitively goes ahead and makes that jump, like let's say Kevin shocks us and goes to the Clippers, because it is that the history of the Clippers and Nets is the biggest hindrance, more so with the Clippers when you're talking about the Donald Sterling chapter and things of that nature. But in a static environment, when you just analyze competency of organization, I mean, like Steve Ballmer to me is still where players are sleeping on what comes with him as a potential boss, where his wealth is on a level that is nowhere touched by any other owner. The front office is loaded. They have a great thing going, but when it comes time for players to look at the situations, it's tough for them. Nets are similar to kind of get past the optics of that franchise. I loved Ballmer's sales pitch when I interviewed him for that story back in the fall, which was basically be the first, be bold, come sign your. You go to the Lakers, you are going to be in the shadow of 10 all-time greats. Maybe it's not 10, it's a half dozen, but you're in the shadow of all these all-time greats and all these banners and everything else. You come here, you're the greatest Clipper on day one. Start your own legacy. Put the Clippers on the map. And I would make the same pitch if I were the Nets. Come put us on the map. Sure, you could go to the Garden and be. Have you noticed, by the way, because we've been on the similar Ballmer coverage path at different times this year. Have you noticed I always love seeing the way these people operate in terms of their strategy. Ballmer, he has been in like low-key recruiting mode like crazy and making sure it's not tampering style, but he's going on the boardroom, Kevin Durant's show, 35 Ventures, did the panel where Kevin wasn't on the panel, but by the way, right next to Rich Kleiman the entire time, Kevin's agent and business manager. I thought that was a pretty savvy move. Randomly on the TNT set, apparently Steve was in Atlanta, and doing the TNT set. You can tell that I do think it is calculated. It's time to get his face out there and try to convince one of these guys to come. Yeah, the Clippers are not being subtle, which I appreciate. I like the fact that this is it. This is what we're doing. Yeah. We were going to, flirt with the edges of decorum and tampering rules. Right. Cool. Well, I think we're out of time. This has been awesome. Thank you all for coming in. Sam, thanks for being part of this as always. Folks, if you are not subscribed to the podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to download podcasts. Hit the subscribe button. If you're on Apple Podcasts, give us a rating and a review. Helps us out a lot. Thank you all again. We'll be back next week. Thanks, everybody.